was an ordinary day, the kind that blends into the background of life without much thought. The bustle of daily movement filled the air, people going to work, children heading to school, traffic humming with the rhythm of a city in motion. Amid all the routine, something quietly extraordinary unfolded. While passing by a city bus, a subtle yet haunting sight caught her eye. A small child, no older than 5, sitting completely alone on a bus seat near the window. The child's face was expressionless, eyes wide but still, like they were holding, in a storm of emotions. There was no adult in sight, not beside her, not nearby, just a little girl in a big, confusing world. The sight didn't scream for attention. There was no crying, no outburst, no chaos. But sometimes the quietest moments are the most alarming. That stillness, that eerie calm in a place where it didn't belong, triggered something deeper, an instinct that something wasn't right. The child was too young to be traveling alone. Even in the most independent of families, a 5-year-old isn't expected to navigate public transportation by herself. It begged questions. Where was she supposed to be going? Was someone meant to be with her? Was she forgotten, or worse, lost? There's a certain kind of alertness that comes over someone when they recognize a situation teetering on the edge of danger. It's not always dramatic. Often it's quiet, observant, deeply personal. In this case, it started with just watching, scanning the surrounding seats, looking for a parent, a guardian, someone who could reassure that all was well. But no one appeared. No hand reached out to the girl. No voice called her name. She sat there, feet swinging slightly above the floor, hands clasped in her lap, eyes fixed ahead. Other passengers seemed unaware or perhaps unwilling to get involved. Sometimes in the hurry of life, people grow numb to the unfamiliar. But that moment couldn't be ignored. There's something about the vulnerability of a child that pierces through the fog of routine and calls upon the better parts of human nature. The girl didn't look scared exactly, but she didn't look safe either. Her body language didn't match the normal energy of a child on an adventure or a school trip. There was no backpack, no adult guiding hand, no interaction with the driver. As the seconds ticked by, the sense of urgency grew. There's always the worry of jumping to conclusions, of overreacting. But then again, when it comes to a child alone in public, can there really be such a thing as too cautious? Instinct said no. The moment demanded attention, compassion, and courage to step beyond the bystander role. That's what happened next. An invisible line was crossed, the one between noticing and acting. It wasn't just about observation anymore. It was about protecting a child who, whether she knew it or not, might be in trouble. The decision to intervene wasn't taken lightly. There are always unknowns. But that uncertainty was outweighed by the unmistakable truth of what was seen. A 5-year-old, alone, unmoving, silent. That image was enough to spark action, to move past hesitation. And in doing so, the course of the day, maybe even the course of the girl's story, changed. It started with a glance, with a feeling in the gut, and turned into something more, something brave, something right. What stands out most in these moments isn't always the loudness of the scene, but the clarity of the feeling. The feeling that someone has to do something, and maybe that someone is you. What unfolded in that quiet corner of the day was a testament to that truth. A small child, unaware of the impact she was having just by being there, unknowingly called out to the world around her. And someone answered. All it took was a sharp eye, a kind heart, and the willingness to trust what was seen, even if no one else had. As soon as it became clear that the little girl was alone, the sense of urgency kicked in. That initial feeling of concern turned into a decisive need to act, not out of fear or panic, but out of an instinctual sense of responsibility. It's one thing to notice that something is wrong. It's another thing entirely to step forward and do something about it. But there was no time to second guess. There was a child on a bus, unaccompanied, small and vulnerable, and that alone was enough to move swiftly. The first step was to approach carefully. The last thing anyone would want is to scare a child already in a potentially confusing or frightening situation. So the movement was calm, deliberate, and thoughtful. There was an unspoken need to appear friendly, non-threatening, and safe. A gentle voice was used, soft, reassuring, not too loud. Just a simple question, asked kindly. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" That small gesture opened the door to communication. The little girl turned her head slowly, looking up, her expression neutral, maybe even a little unsure. But she didn't shy away, she didn't flinch or cry, she simply looked. That moment of eye contact was powerful. It was a silent acknowledgement that something wasn't right, even if the child couldn't say so. It's hard to explain, but sometimes understanding happens without words. She didn't need to explain herself in that moment. Her presence alone told the story. She wasn't accompanied, and it didn't seem like she knew exactly where she was going. That realization solidified the urgency. No adult had stepped forward to claim her. No one said, "She's with me." The driver seemed unaware. The rest of the passengers were lost in their own worlds. It became clear. Someone had to take the lead. The next move was to alert the bus driver. It was important not to create a scene, but rather to communicate the concern clearly and respectfully. The driver, surprised and a bit confused at first, quickly understood the gravity of the situation. A child, that young, riding alone wasn't just unusual, it was a potential emergency. The bus was brought to a stop and an assessment began. Questions were asked, gently. "Do you know where your mommy or daddy is? Do you know where you're going?" But the little girl didn't have answers. She seemed unsure. She looked around, like she was searching for a cue, for someone to step in and explain, but there was no one. That was the moment when the emotional weight of the situation really settled in. A child so young, lost in a moving world with no clear direction, can tug at the very core of your heart. There was no way to know how long she'd been riding alone, or how she ended up there in the first place. Maybe she got on the wrong bus. Maybe she wandered away and no one noticed. The possibilities raced through the mind, each more unsettling than the last. But dwelling on the how wasn't as important right then as focusing on the what now. The decision was made to call for help. Not just any help, but the right kind. Authorities trained to handle delicate situations involving children. Emergency services were contacted, and every effort was made to keep the child calm and comfortable while they waited. She was offered a seat near the front, a bottle of water, some small reassurances that everything was going to be okay. The kindness continued in every detail. Gentle words, a calm tone, a steady presence. Even if the little girl didn't understand, every word she could feel the safety, the care. That mattered. There's a fine line between stepping in and overstepping. But in this case, there was no hesitation. It was clear that this child needed someone to be brave enough to intervene, to take that first step, and to stay present until she was no longer alone. Not all heroes wear capes or arrive with sirens. Sometimes they're just the people who notice, who trust their gut, and who act with compassion when it matters most. Every second counted. Every choice made during those moments was led by empathy, and the simple belief that no child should ever have to navigate the world. Once the authorities arrived, everything began to shift from uncertainty toward resolution. The little girl, still quiet and visibly processing everything around her, was gently handed over to trained professionals. There was no drama, no raised voices, just calm, coordinated steps to ensure she was safe. She held tightly onto the small stuffed animal she'd been given, her fingers gripping it like it was the only familiar thing in a world that had suddenly become overwhelming. The professionals were kind, kneeling to meet her eyes, speaking softly, offering comfort in their tone as much as in their words. While waiting, one of the officers managed to get just enough information from her. Her first name, maybe a few, other scattered details. It wasn't a full story, but it was a start. Through a combination of intuition, experience, and protocol, the authorities worked quickly to piece together who she was and where she belonged. Calls were made, records checked, and slowly the puzzle began to come together. On the other end of those calls was a family that had been gripped by fear, their hearts likely stuck in that cold, helpless space between panic and hope. When word reached them that she had been found, safe and unharmed, the relief must have been immeasurable. The Yas reunion was arranged with care. These moments can be overwhelming, especially for a young child who's already gone through a whirlwind of emotions. She didn't cry, she didn't say much. But as her family arrived and she saw a familiar face, maybe a mother, a father, a sibling, her expression softened in a way words can't quite capture. There was a slight movement in her eyes, a recognition that the nightmare had ended and that her people were here. The stuffed animal was still in her arms, but now it wasn't the only thing she held on to. When she was finally wrapped in the arms of her family, time seemed to pause. Emotions ran high, tears, laughter, relief. There's a kind of silence that comes with joy so deep it doesn't need noise to be understood. Everyone nearby felt it too. You could sense it in the atmosphere, in the soft smiles of the officers, in the gratitude from the family, in the undeniable truth that this could have ended differently, but didn't. It was a rare, genuine moment of grace in a world that too often rushes past such stories. What stood out most wasn't the chaos of what happened. It was the humanity of it all. The pure, unfiltered emotion of a family restored, of a child safely returned, of a community doing the right thing. Sometimes we forget how fragile safety is, how much it depends on people looking out for one another. And sometimes we're reminded in the most unexpected ways, like a quiet child on a busy bus, surrounded by strangers, waiting for someone to notice. In those final moments of the scene, before everyone dispersed, there was a sense of quiet, pride. Not pride for recognition or praise, but the quiet kind that comes from knowing something good happened today, something real. A child's safety had been protected. A family's fear had been turned into gratitude, and it had all started with someone noticing what others didn't and refusing to look the other way. The little girl didn't say much as she left. She didn't need to. Her presence was the message. She was safe. She was back with those who loved her, and her story, at least this part of it, had been gently folded back into something whole. That final glance just before she disappeared into the embrace of her family was the kind of moment that stays with you. Not because of its drama, but because of its simplicity. A moment where love showed up, where kindness mattered, and where the world, just for a minute, got it right. What happened on that bus didn't just end with a child being safely reunited with her family. It echoed into something larger, something deeply human. It served as a quiet but powerful reminder of how important it is to remain aware of one another. In the busy rush of daily life, it's easy to focus only on personal responsibilities, schedules, screens, and distractions. But this moment cut through that noise, showing that sometimes the smallest action, a second glance, a question, a pause, can change everything. In a world that often feels disconnected, where people pass each other without acknowledgement and problems are sometimes dismissed as someone else's responsibility, this act stood out. It said, without needing to be shouted, that looking out for others still matters. Community isn't just about where people live, it's about how they live with each other. It's the silent agreements we make to care, even when we don't have to, especially when someone might need us the most. The reality is that situations like this can unfold at any time. A child can slip away from a distracted caregiver. A wrong turn can become something more dangerous. But what makes the difference is whether someone notices, and what they do once they do. Too often, people hesitate. They worry about overstepping, or being wrong. They fear becoming involved in something messy or misunderstood. But this story showed what it looks like to trust compassion over fear, to lean into empathy even when the outcome is uncertain. There's something deeply encouraging about that. It tells a different kind of story than the ones usually dominating the news or social media feeds. This was a story without blame or controversy, just a straightforward example of someone seeing a need and responding. And that response rippled. It reassured not just the child or her family, but also the others who witnessed it or later heard about it. It became a story of comfort, a reminder that despite the chaos and complexity of the world, kindness still shows up in the small, unscripted moments. Children are often the ones who remind adults how to see the world with clarity. A child alone on a bus doesn't require an explanation. It instantly feels wrong. That pure instinct is what should guide more actions, not just for dramatic events, but in the everyday. Helping an elderly person across the street, asking someone if they're okay when they look distressed, speaking up when something feels off. These are not grand gestures, but they hold the potential to prevent harm, to offer reassurance, and to reconnect us with the values that truly matter. This event also serves as a challenge to reconsider what community really means. It's not just a word used in mission statements or local newsletters. It's a living, breathing force built moment by moment in choices like this. Community is defined by how people react when no one's watching. It's built in the spaces where responsibility isn't assigned but still embraced. It's held together by people who choose to see and care. People who recognize that safety, dignity, and compassion are shared responsibilities. Perhaps the most powerful part of the story was that it didn't involve any special training, tools, or authority. It didn't require a hero's cape or official role. It simply required someone to notice a child in need and act from the heart. That simplicity makes the story all the more universal. It means anyone could be that person. Everyone has the power to pay attention, to speak up, to reach out. The ability to make a difference isn't reserved for the few. It lives in all of us. And while this moment ended with relief and gratitude, its lessons continue. They live in every parent who hugs their child a little tighter, in every stranger who decides to check on someone who looks uncertain, in every community member who commits to being just a bit more present. That's the kind of ripple effect that can't be measured but can certainly be felt. It's the kind that makes the world a little safer, a little softer, and a whole lot more human. This story is a beautiful reminder that sometimes the most powerful acts are the quietest ones. No fanfare, no spotlight, just a moment when someone chose to care. In a world where it's easy to stay in your own lane and avoid getting involved, it takes something special to step forward, especially when the situation is uncertain. That choice, made in a heartbeat, helped protect a child and gave a family back their peace. And while the details may fade with time, the impact of that choice will never be forgotten. Moments like these reveal something incredibly important. We are all connected, whether we realize it or not. A child's safety became the concern of a stranger. One person's awareness rippled out and brought in others, bus drivers, passengers, police, a family, and together, what could have been a tragedy became a story of hope. It's proof that even the smallest actions can create waves of good, and that kindness has a way of spreading far beyond the original moment. The heart of this story lies in its simplicity. A child was alone and someone cared enough to notice. That's all it took to change the outcome completely. It didn't require training or money or power, it just required compassion. And that's something every person is capable of. There's something incredibly empowering about that. It reminds us that we all have a role to play in the lives of those around us, even if only for a moment. It also challenges the idea that helping someone has to be a big production. It doesn't. It just has to be genuine. That small, kind act of checking on a child, making a call, staying present, those are the things that make the world better, one moment at a time. And when those moments add up, they start to shift the way we live with and look after each other. They create communities that are not just shared spaces, but shared responsibilities. There's also a quiet strength in choosing to get involved. It takes courage to act when others remain silent. It takes empathy to feel for someone you don't know, and it takes heart to put someone else's safety before your own comfort. These are not easy choices, but they are meaningful ones. They define who we are, not just in what we say, but in what we do when it truly counts. As this story fades from headlines and conversation, its message remains: be the one who notices. Be the one who cares, because it's not just about saving the day, it's about shaping a world where fewer people fall through the cracks and more people know that they matter, even to a stranger. In the end, that's the kind of story that really sticks. One rooted in compassion, made possible by courage, and remembered because of love.